I just wanted to share this energy with you, this space and time with you here through this video and on this channel by talking about the number one way to heal the twin flame connection. Have you ever heard the quote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you"? This is a powerful Rumi quote, which, by the way, I am a huge Rumi fan. If you haven't yet looked up some of these quotes, they are immensely powerful. But anyway, this quote very much applies to the twin flame connection. Within the twin flame connection, something happens, a dynamic we refer to as mirroring and triggering. And I'm going to teach you how we can transform the triggers that emerge through this mirroring with our twin flame, how we can transform them into a very deep level healing rather than reacting to them, and ultimately through this process, how we can not only heal ourselves, but in doing so, heal our twin flame connection. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Infinity, and this is Magnetize Yourself, where we talk about life, love, spirituality, and of course, the law of attraction. In what ways do you find yourself triggered by your twin flame? Tell me in the comments a little bit about your experience with mirroring or triggering in your twin flame connection. There are so many of you beautiful souls out there listening, and I can feel each and every one of you. I read each and every one of your comments, and I am trying to respond to as many of them as I possibly can. Within this community, love is catching like wildfire. We are mutually supporting one another along our individual twin flame journeys, as well as this collective journey that we share together. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Let's talk first about the wound within the twin flame connection. The thing you need to understand about the wound within the twin flame connection is that twin flames aren't actually creating new wounds within one another. They are bringing to the surface wounds in need of healing. The way that these wounds are brought to the surface is through something we refer to as twin flame mirroring. This isn't something that happens occasionally from time to time within the twin flame connection. Twin flames are always perfectly energetically mirroring one another at every single moment of every single day, even prior to meeting and even during periods of separation. In fact, that is really the very definition of a twin flame. It is a soul who is your perfect energetic mirror. However, just as when you look into a mirror, if you had an open wound on your face, you would obviously be able to see it. When twin flames look at one another, they see their own wounds reflected back to them. Now, the problem is As twin flames, we come from usually past romantic relationships that were based upon a very different dynamic. Within these past relationships, the person we were dating we saw as very external. So oftentimes we would point out things about this person that we didn't like. We didn't see this person as a reflection of ourselves. We saw them as very separate from ourselves, very external. With a twin flame, we tend to try to bring this outdated way of viewing relationships, these past relationship experiences, into the twin flame connection. So usually what happens is, in the beginning, our twin flame mirrors back to us our own wounds, fears, insecurities. And because we don't yet realize that they are our mirror, that these are actually wounds, fears, and insecurities within ourselves, we start to do the same thing that we did with previous partners. We try to point out these problems to them, not realizing that they are also our own, that they are reflected within us. And this is the ego playing out its role, the ego speaking within the twin flame connection. And then this is where the triggering begins, because our twin flame obviously reacts very negatively to having these things, these wounds, pointed out to them. And unconsciously they recognize, hey, you have these same wounds within yourself. And then they often, even verbally, will point out our flaws, will point out our own fears, insecurities, and anxieties to us and say, hey, you are reflecting these things in your own life. You have these own things in need of healing. And of course, then this triggers us to do an even deeper analysis, observation of our twins' wounds, which again are our own. And it creates this cycle, this endless spiral of what we call the mirroring and the triggering. When we are in our ego and our twin flame is in their ego, this cycle can look very toxic. It can look like two people constantly pointing out one another's flaws in a very negative way. It can look like two people perpetually triggering one another to increasingly negative reactions, right? Because this spiral doesn't just continue, it actually spirals downward, which is how, if you've noticed, you and your twin flame can spiral each other into these downward cycles of toxicity, of pointing out each other's flaws. It can become very intense, very fast. And the reason is because of this perfect mirroring between you, and then this cycle of the mirror and the trigger that leads to this increasing downward cycle. And just as a quick side note, this is just one very unique aspect of the twin flame relationship, is the ways in which you can trigger each other downward into an endless downward spiral of triggering into negativity. But what many people don't realize is this equally works in the opposite direction. You can equally trigger one another to an endless upward cycle of growth, upliftment, healing, and soul evolution. So I hope that in me saying that gives you a different, a clearer perspective on how that quote from the beginning of this video applies. Once again, the wound is the place where the light enters you. In the same way, we can trigger our twin and ourselves into a downward spiral of negativity. We can use this wound as an entry point, a portal through which to trigger one another in the opposite direction, to trigger each other toward our highest soul evolution, growth, and deepest level healing. So, how do we flip this equation? How do we use these triggers, these wounds, as points of healing rather than points at which we begin this negative downward cycle? It all begins with finding the space between the trigger and the reaction. The trigger itself isn't actually the problem, and it doesn't even actually have to be a negative thing, but only if we can separate ourselves from this trigger. Within our lives, we are programmed. There is an example set, usually by our parents, teachers, peers, programmed into us by society, that we have to react to our triggers. This is the model we are taught. Things happen to us. People say things to us. We are triggered in certain ways, and we must become attached to those triggers, and we must react instinctively to them. What if, rather than immediately seeing our triggers, the times our twin flame triggers us as negative, and immediately reacting to them, we could find a space, a gap between the trigger and what we will now call the response, because there is a very key difference between a response and a reaction. Just looking at a definition I found online to give you a clear idea of this difference. A response, while technically a reaction, takes into consideration the desired outcome of the interaction. A reaction may result in a positive or negative outcome, whereas a response is engineered to produce a positive outcome. So, in other words, a response has a clear intention behind it, and in this case, in the case of a twin flame connection and our twin flame healing, when we respond to our triggers, we use the gap between the trigger and the response to set an intention for our own healing and the healing of our twin flame connection, rather than whatever benefit our ego would get from immediately reacting. Because our reactions come from the ego, whereas a response can come from the soul. Whenever we are triggered by our twin flame, our ego naturally wants to react to this trigger to protect itself. The only way to begin to release this need for ego protection is to increase our sense of inner security, because the ego, when it is looking for external validation, is doing so because it doesn't feel as if we are stable and secure within ourselves. This is why I always say that healing the twin flame connection isn't external at all. It is a very internal process. Find the time in the morning to meditate in order to increase the space naturally between our triggers and our responses, because if you wait until the moment your twin flame triggers you to attempt this healing process, to attempt to not react right away, you may find it difficult or even impossible to do so and be very discouraged. These trigger reactions tend to happen very unconsciously, very naturally, and tend to spring up from a very deep subconscious place within us. Meditation is a very powerful tool for increasing, widening the gap between our triggers and our reactions or responses in every area of our life, but especially as twin flames within this twin flame connection. Just set aside, carve out for yourself 15 to 20 minutes every single morning to completely clear your mind. In this act of relaxing your mind, clearing your mind, you will naturally widen the space between all of your triggers throughout the day that follows, and your ability to respond to those triggers rather than react will drastically increase. It will become much more natural to choose to respond. I highly recommend incorporating subliminals designed for twin flames during this morning meditation period. I have created a 7-chakra twin flame healing, clearing subliminal, and this meditation is designed to not only heal your twin flame connection broadly, but to do so by reprogramming your own subconscious mind. Because, like I said, our reactions to triggers usually come from very deep subconscious programming, ways in which, on a very unconscious level, we feel insecure or fearful, unworthy of love, or afraid in some way within ourselves. Those fears and insecurities and anxieties, although they may be very unconscious, will always reflect in our natural responses to our twin flame, to these triggers, and will always set up blockages, barriers between us and our twin flame. So to assist you in dissolving those inner blockages, and by doing so to dissolve any blocks between you and your twin flame, check out this subliminal either in the pinned comment or in the description box of this video. You can try it out completely free for 7 days when you create an account on my members only website, Sound and Soulful. It is available in a spoken, conscious version as well as an unconscious subliminal version. And it is also available in 4 different background sounds: music, rain, ocean waves, or white noise. Once you begin to widen this gap through morning meditation, the next step is to choose how you are going to respond to this trigger. Rather than immediately reacting by looking at your twin flame's flaws, by externalizing this situation, by putting the blame all on them, use it as a point of introspection. Accept the truth that your twin flame is your mirror, and ask yourself the very difficult yet necessary question when this trigger emerges. How is my twin flame reflecting back to me a wound or a pattern within myself? This requires a great deal of introspection. It requires us to take a very clear look at ourselves, at our own patterns, some of which, again, could be very unconscious, but always exist. Whenever our twin flame is triggering something, we must accept that there is something within ourselves in need of healing, and accepting this point of acceptance, is a doorway through which you can begin to use these triggers as healing moments. And as you begin to recognize what patterns are in need of healing within yourself, choose to take a breath, whether this means to step away from your twin flame for a moment and in the middle of a conversation, take some kind of a pause to do this introspection. Determine where this pattern is, where this wound is in need of healing, because simply acknowledging what might be bringing up this trigger is a very powerful way to begin to heal it. And once you acknowledge it, once you look it in the eyes and recognize it, in that moment, find some way to begin to address it consciously. This won't happen all in one interaction, all in one day. Like I've said in previous videos, there is that quote about the poison leaving bit by bit, not all at once. Healing within the twin flame connection isn't linear, it's not a straight line. It is day to day, slowly unraveling these patterns, negative habits and wounds within ourselves through these triggers that come up within this connection. I find that one way to get started with unraveling these wounds and patterns once you recognize them is through journaling. I've downloaded even just a free journal app on my phone, and if I find myself triggered in the moment, I will pause, separate myself from the situation, and just begin to free write my thoughts about it and try to identify where it is coming from. Because oftentimes, like I said, we are very unconscious of our own negative patterns. But if we acknowledge them and begin to ask questions about them, we can often realize that these patterns come from early childhood, prior romantic relationships, prior wounds that had nothing to do with our twin flame, but that they were showing us because they are our greatest mirror, and through being our mirror, they are also our greatest healer and teacher in this life. I know this was in some ways a glossed over guide to healing your twin flame connection through your triggers that come up with them. There is just so much detail, so much information here that I could talk about. So if you have any more in-depth questions on either twin flame healing, mirroring, triggering, or any aspect of this process, please do let me know in the comments. I always say this, but my favorite part about this community we are building here together are the ways in which we can connect, share our light, share our energy and our journey and inspiration through the comments. So if you'd like to be part of this beautiful community of like-minded, conscious, creative beings here on YouTube, please subscribe to this channel. I hope to see you around in future videos and continue connecting with you through this platform. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again in the next podcast.